Okay, I think I will just get started with today's webinar. So thanks everyone for joining. This is the open Q&A session for the Researcher Access Service Accelerator Awards. My name is Rosie Seaman. I'm a data sourcing manager for Research Data Scotland, and I'm also running this funding call. So just some quick housekeeping for everyone. I've got my colleagues here, Carly and Ollie. They're going to help me manage the chat. Your microphones are currently deactivated, but if you do need to ask a question, just raise your virtual hand and Carly and Ollie will be able to activate your microphone. Alternatively, there is a chat. If you could just use the chat function as well, we'll try and maintain sort of conversation through that. Just to make you aware as well, we have enabled kind of live captions, but it might be up to you as the participant just to put that on, and it's in the 3 dots at the top corner and it says more, but you should be able to do the live captions if you need them. So for today, we're going to run through a quick outline about Research Data Scotland. We're quite a new organisation, so hopefully you've all heard of us, but we'll just give you a brief overview. Then we're going to give you an insight into the Researcher Access Service roadmap and how it's been developed to date. My colleague Jen Campbell is then going to give a quick demonstration of the release 1 of the Researcher Access Service, and then we'll open it up, hopefully, for plenty of time for questions and answers about specifically the funding call that is currently live. So Research Data Scotland is a new organisation, and as many of you know, data is often locked away in lots of different systems, is under lots of different data controllers, different organisations, and it's not in a format that makes really important research easy or scalable. So Research Data Scotland wants to help both researchers and data controllers by providing the digital tools and services that will speed up and simplify data-driven research for public benefit. Research Data Scotland are a data services organisation, helping researchers make the most of excellent data that already exists. So we don't collect primary data, we're working with data that's already available through existing organisations. We have a particular focus on sensitive case level data, so data about people, places or businesses, rather than aggregated data about areas of Scotland. And absolutely everything we do at Research Data Scotland is guided by the 5 SAFE frameworks. So that's safe data, safe projects, safe people, safe settings, and safe outputs. So we're really proud to be working with all of these partners across Scotland, and it was really encouraging today to see so many of these organisations represented on the registration for the webinar. And now I'm going to run through what we're getting ready for in the next few months, which is release 1 of the Researcher Access Service. So the Researcher Access Service will be a fully digital platform covering these key roadmap stages that a researcher has to go through to apply and use data in the National Safe Haven. Many of you on the call may have completed this process with applications as Word documents and navigating the public benefit and privacy panel approvals with email attachments and Word document track changes. So the Researcher Access Service will improve and digitise this entire system from end to end for you as researchers and for Idris and their team of research coordinators. So the Researcher Access Service is an entire system-wide transformation that's going to ensure research for the public good, and so that we can do this at pace and at scale, ultimately to improve lives in Scotland. Release 1 of the Researcher Access Service will only include 9 datasets to begin with, and they're the 9 datasets that were advertised in the Accelerator Award funding call. So researchers will be able to request specific cohorts from these datasets and linkages for the same person between these datasets only, and it must always be for projects that demonstrate public benefit. The reasons for launching release 1 of the Researcher Access Service with only these 9 datasets are both demand-driven reasons and pragmatic reasons. So it's demand-driven, as over 32% of requests made to Idris are for one or more of these 9 datasets. And this is pragmatic as well, because Public Health Scotland signed a shared data controllership agreement with Research Data Scotland, initially for these 9 data sets. And as a shared data controller, Public Health Scotland have demonstrated an unwavering commitment to these system-wide transformations and to partnership working with Research Data Scotland. And the significance of achieving this should not be underestimated. And Public Health Scotland really are paving the way for the future of data-driven research in Scotland. So that's just a huge shout out to Public Health Scotland, who've been working with us along the way. So Research Data Scotland to date have really focused on building the publicly accessible front end starting point of the service. This is the part of the service that's hosted publicly within our website and includes things like the metadata catalogue and the initial inquiry form. So we're trying to become the single central point for all inquiries for working with data in the National Safe Haven. The next stage that we're getting ready to launch in the next few months is the fully digitised application and approval process. This has included building a transparent user interface for both researchers and IDRIS research coordinators. And this has been a much more complex part of building out the service. And after we do release 1, we need to ensure it's fully meeting all researcher needs, and we need to identify the scope for development. So we're going to be doing continuous testing and incremental development of the Researcher Access Service, and we want to emphasise that Release 1 really is only the start of the Researcher Access Service. This will be what we're calling our minimum viable product, but we have huge ambitions for where we want to go with the Researcher Access Service. So Phase 1 release is intended to be simple, but will offer notable improvements from the existing Word document and email application approvals process. At the first release, the Researcher Access Service will enable for the first time a fully digital platform for the management of applications and approvals, and it will enable full transparency for researchers with direct login to see real-time updates to the stage of their application, and they'll receive direct notifications relating to their application. So I'm now going to pass on to my colleague Jen, who's been really involved in the technical development of this, and she's going to show you some of the key features of Release 1 of the Researcher Access Service.
Hi there, thanks Rosie. Yeah, I'm just going to really briefly run through kind of a few screens. We're not going to do a live demo today. I'm sure lots of you will be aware that comes with its own risks when you're still building your system, and we're in the middle of doing some user testing pretty much as we speak, and also we've still got kind of build and test work going on. So rather than kind of messing around in the environments and risking any kind of hiccups, I thought we'd just kind of go through some kind of screenshots, but I can kind of talk over what happens in each of those sections. So just before I go into that, if we go on to the next slide. So just a wee bit of context. I think Rosie's kind of touched on some of this, but in terms of our delivery of the Researcher Access Service as a digital service, we've taken an agile delivery approach. So what that really means is that we're focusing on delivering value as early as possible. So rather than waiting until we've built absolutely everything that it could possibly do, every possible user journey, every possible kind of way that we could, people could use that service, starting small, getting something out there so that we can get real user feedback and then build based on that rather than just based on kind of what we think people need. We've been cooperating really closely with the IDRIS team throughout the design and the build of the service. So we've had research coordinators, data analysts, project support officers, all embedded in our team, working with our technology partner as well directly to make sure that our whole service is kind of informed by how things need to work and what processes need to be supported. Very much guided by user needs, both from the kind of staff user needs, but also of course researcher user needs. And as I mentioned, we're going through a round of usability testing at the moment, which is giving us some really useful feedback that will contribute to our next steps. And just, yeah, reiterating, we're starting small, we're testing and learning, and we're building out the service incrementally. So this is kind of current version, and we'd expect to build on this regularly going forward, which is all part of that sort of agile approach that I mentioned. So if we just go on to the next slide, so this is just a kind of view of the initial inquiry form. it's really the sort of entry point in. So if you had a thought about a project that you might want to do, you wanted to engage, understand maybe what the costs would be, what approval process you need to go through to get access to the data, this would be where you would come in. So this would be accessed through our website. We've got the sections down the side, you know, the different bits of data. It's a fairly short form, and it's really just that kind of initial information gathering, so that the IDRIS team can then triage that application, that inquiry, and decide where it needs to go. The next slide, please. So at the end of that inquiry form, you would get a bit of information about what happens next. So it'll go into the IDRIS team, it'll be evaluated, you'll get some information about next steps. At that point, you would also understand whether your project can go down the Researcher Access Service approvals route, which is, you know, the 9 data sets. Does it fit into the criteria of this particular pathway? Or is it actually wider than that? It needs to access other data, and therefore it needs to go down the PBPP route. You'll also maybe notice there, we've got a cost estimate there. That's something we're still kind of building on. So, you know, if it's relatively straightforward, we can offer that kind of cost estimate up front. If there's a bit more work needed, a bit more kind of investigation, then that would go into the IDRIS team to work out that cost. I think kind of similar to what happens at the moment. Next one, please. So once you've done that initial inquiry, somebody at the triage stage would be looking at that. If they've worked out that actually, yes, this does fit within the scope of the 9 data sets, the Researcher Access Service approvals route, then you would be directed to log in to this kind of this homepage here, which would be your sort of landing place to start your full application. So the full application is that more extensive kind of set of questions that allows you to get the approval for your data access. This is really would be kind of where you would come to update your application. You can save it, you can go away, you can come back. If there are tasks that you need to complete, so for example, further down the line, you might need to upload a user agreement or something like that, you would be able to see at a glance what tasks you've got. You might have multiple applications on the go. You might have one for a project that's already active. You might have one for a new project. So you would have all those kind of in one place at a glance, and you could see from that kind of progress bar where each of them are. So this one, it's a new application there, so it's just kind of at that initial stage. But those sort of icons would help you to understand where it is. You can also see when it's been last updated. So for example, if somebody on the IDRIS side has left a comment for you, if they've asked you to do something, you would be able to tell that it's been looked at recently, or that it hasn't, and you might want to go in and do something, ask for something. So that's just that kind of landing page. Go on to the next one. And again, I'm not going to go through the whole application form because I don't want to take up all the time on this, but just wanted to kind of pick out a couple of key features. So when you're in your application form, obviously it is quite detailed. There's quite a lot there. As I say, you can save and return to that. You can do a bit of it, go away, come back. We've also got this comments feature on the side, which is new. And the idea here really is that if you were working through this form, if you weren't sure about a question, you could leave a comment, you could ask for help with that, and someone would come back to you in that one place. So everything's kind of kept together, and you can view and review those comments later on. That comments function is also used once you've kind of got your application, you think you've finished it, you submit it off to the IDRIS team. They could come back and say, oh, we need a bit more information here. Could you expand on this? Could you clarify this? That kind of thing could also be done through this comments function. It just keeps everything in one place. You've not got emails flying around and things like that. Next one, please. So I just thought it'd be useful, again, because obviously this is very much a researcher audience, primarily focused there on the applicant journey, but just kind of showing this one screen here, which is more from the IDRIS team perspective, so the research coordinators and other team members there. Again, this would be sort of a view they could have, so they could see all the applications that are active at a glance. They can see what stage they're at. They can see what needs attention. something that is awaiting a task for them. It's really clear there. Again, they can see when it's been last updated. So it'd be easy to look at, what needs attention, what's maybe not been looked at for a while. So all of this really just to sort of support and contribute to that objective of speeding things up, making things easier and more streamlined for everybody, both the researchers and the team that are managing these, and making it easy for everyone to kind of track and understand where things are at any given point, because we understand these applications can go back and forward. There can be, things can change partway through, so it's really important that we've got kind of a source, one source of the truth, and we know what's happening at that point in time. And I think that's the last one I've got. Obviously that was very much a whistle stop tour. I didn't want to take up all the time on the Accelerator Awards just on that, but we will be sharing lots more over the kind of next couple of months on our website and in our newsletters and things like that about the progress of the Researcher Access Service, so please do keep an eye out for that.
Thanks very much, Jen. I think the thing as well to emphasise, this is quite a change in the workflow for IDRIS. Instead of being assigned a single research coordinator, it'll become a very task-based process. So things should speed up in how they're moving, and multiple research coordinators can carry your application through the different stages. So now I'm going to talk about the Accelerator Awards, which is the current funding call. And this really was an opportunity for us to mark this milestone for Research Data Scotland as a new organisation, delivering our first major system transformation, and also a celebration of all the partnership work with Public Health Scotland. So it's a small grant fund, and we've called it the Accelerator Awards because the idea is that we want to be accelerating both the Researcher Access Service, but we want to be accelerating research for public good in Scotland. So just to run over again the funding aims, they really are to continue to promote research for public good in Scotland. We need to be cementing the Researcher Access Service approvals pathway. So this is a different pathway from the Public Benefit Privacy Panel pathway. So we need to be cementing that as a new way to gaining access to data in the National Safe Haven. And as Jen has iterated, we need to have lots of opportunities to gain really valuable user feedback that's going to inform and shape the future developments of the Researcher Access Service and everything that can encapsulate. So the funding criteria that was advertised, it has to be approved organisations, and researchers have to have up-to-date information governance training for the lifetime of a project. Your projects need to be clearly defined and feasible within the 9 data sets and within the linkage potential of those 9 data sets. And your research must always demonstrate a clear public benefit. We're asking those who apply to agree to participate in some user engagement activities that will inform and shape improvements. And we're also asking applicants to demonstrate a sound understanding of individual level linked data. That doesn't just have to be in Scotland, because we know that lots of people have experience of individual level linked data from different countries, but just to demonstrate your understanding of it. And also we're looking for applicants who demonstrate a sound commitment to sharing their experiences and who really want to help to inform and improve the current data linkage landscape in Scotland. And as always, a justification for resources within the scope of the funding available. And just a reminder of the funding that is available. We've got a maximum of £50,000 to give away. We would like to fund a minimum of 2 projects, so researchers can request a maximum of £25,000. We will cover salary costs. The data fee associated with the Accelerator Awards will be waived, so you don't have to budget for any data costs in the £25,000. And then we will cover up to a maximum of 15% of management costs. This is your university's kind of indirect, direct costings, and we can provide further clarification to any of your university or organisational financial teams if they need that. But it's a maximum amount of £25,000 that you can apply for, so that has to include your management or indirect costs. So as mentioned, the research projects that we're looking to fund can only request study populations and linkages from these 9 data sets. Currently, the Researcher Access Service does not include any other data sets, but that is future scope and future ambition. So do watch how the Researcher Access Service develops. And I'd just like to clarify for these 9 data sets that intergenerational linkages, so for instance, mothers and children, is not possible within the first release. But again, it's in the scope of the ambition for the long-term Researcher Access Service. So now it's just opening up for any question and answers. So feel free to use the chat, or if anyone wants to put their hand up and put their camera and microphone on, we'd be delighted to answer some of your questions. Okay, I can see the chat's flagging up. Yeah, so I'll answer Joanna's first question because it's a little bit easier. So Joanna's just asking if she's understood correctly that they won't have to go through the PBPP process. That is correct for these 9 data sets only. So what we have now is a different agreement in place, that it's going to be a sort of relative information governance triage process, kind of taking it from that sort of place of fear. This national safe haven has existed for 10 years with no issues, no information governance breaches. And also every researcher that gets access to the national safe haven has to come from an approved organisation, has to have the accredited training, has to go through all of the digital security to get access to the national safe haven. So we're kind of put in place this new process for initially these first 9 data sets that allows us to remove the hurdle of the PBPP. But you will have to still complete an application that asks you similar questions. It's just we have permission now to seek approval that without the PBPP process involved. I hope that helps. Is there scope? Yeah, so I'll go to Fiona quickly about importing existing data sets. So that's not within the scope of this current funding call. As we've tried to explain with Jen and the service that we're building, what we like to think of the current 9 data sets and the Researcher Access Service Release 1, this is our minimum viable product or our proof of concept. This is our chance as an organisation to demonstrate that efficiencies and improvements and scalability is possible. And we've been given a really unique opportunity to do this with 9 data sets to begin with. So for the funding call, that's not currently possible to link in any variables from other data sets. But what you can do is use any variables for any study population in the 9 data sets. But you'd have to make that clear in your application, and that's what the Researcher Access Service should enable. You should be able to go through the online digital system, select the data you want, the variables you want, and make it a much more streamlined process. Yeah, so exactly, Joanna. So the long-term plan for the Researcher Access Service is that we will bring in new data sets into the Researcher Access Service, into this digital platform. So currently there's about 20 more Public Health Scotland data sets that sit within the National Safe Haven, and there's 7 Scottish Government data sets that sit within the National Safe Haven. So our long-term strategy is to bring those into the Researcher Access Service. And then beyond that, we're looking at lots of new opportunities for data that's maybe been requested a few times from researchers but doesn't currently sit in the National Safe Haven, or we're looking at policy priority areas where we can bring new data sets that have never previously been available. Okay, so another question is about, we've asked that projects try to utilise the linkage potential in the 9 data sets, and is that a minimum number of data sets? I would say no, it's not a minimum number of data sets. We didn't set a minimum criteria, but the minimum for linkage is 2. So I don't think that's going to go against you. If there's an application that links 2 data sets and one that links 4, we're going to look at the applications as a whole. The marking criteria was published alongside the questions, so you'll see what the funding panel is scoring your questions out of, if that's helpful as well. So it wouldn't go against you if you only linked 2 and someone else did 4. It won't be as simple as that. Great, thanks, great. Is there some Yep. So demographic information in the data. Yeah, alongside the application form, there is a big kind of variables data dictionary that lists all the potential variables that you can request. So there is stuff in there like age, sex. You can get some geographical information such as the Health Board or SIMD. So we're really encouraging researchers to make sure that you look at those list of variables just so you know. So birth registrations. Oh, that's a really good question, Denise. I might come back to that because I think I've got some Idris colleagues on the line. So that's if the birth registrations from NRS are linked to the child or mother's health records. But I think this is the mother and child linkage, which is not possible within this release 1. So I think you could define your child study population and link the children, or you could define your mothers and link to your mothers, but you couldn't look in tandem at mothers and children. Are there plans to allow for more detailed regional variables? I think a lot of that comes down to disclosive nature. So obviously the lower we get in terms of geography, it's not that we couldn't provide those things, it just becomes potentially quite disclosive under that one. So I'll just scroll back up. If I've missed anyone, please just let me know. It was the first question that I wanted to come back to. Okay, so I think question 1 is asking about flags being created and what data will be seen. So ultimately you will enter the National Safe Haven in the same manner that you do now, and your data will be available in your project folder. And the process that Idris staff are doing in the background is still relatively similar. But again, I was saying that it's changing the workflow from being based on one research coordinator to making it really task-based. So everyone in the Idris team can jump into multiple projects and deliver it faster. And again, that's part of the learning we're really looking to do with these 9 data sets is how scalable is that? How complex can projects get within a digital system, within a task-based management system, before we start to see some of those challenges again of multiple flags, multiple data sets. So I hope that clarifies that question, but it's definitely somewhere we're looking to make sure we get it right. And that's again justification for using these 9 data sets to begin with, is usually the linkages between these 9 data sets are fairly standard, and what has been demonstrated over the past 10 years is the public benefit of research done with those 9 data sets. So they're a bit lower level in terms of complexity, and they're a bit lower level in terms of they've demonstrated the research value. The initial inquiry process. So the initial inquiry process has been online via the Research Data Scotland website now for quite a few months. And that's where we'd really encourage all inquiries to come, whether it be for these initial 9 data sets or future data sets that we should have on the horizon for bringing into the Researcher Access Service. So I don't have a timeline on that. I think it's pretty quick. I don't know if Jen or Suhail was on from Idris, if we have a fixed time from inquiry to response.
So yeah, just to come in on that, in terms of the initial inquiry when we sort of launch our new Researcher Access Service, it will be very similar in terms of the form to what we've got on the website at the moment. It's just that we're sort of if it fits within the criteria of the 9 data sets, it would go down this route. We haven't attached a kind of time frame to it at the moment, because we don't really know what the volumes will be. We don't know how much kind of interest there'll be in those initial kind of few months. As Rosie mentioned earlier, the sort of stages are kind of task-based rather than kind of an owned case. So if it does go down that route, then the idea is that we will be able to move things through faster, because you're not necessarily waiting on one person that has to take all the actions on it. I wouldn't want to say that we would definitely achieve it in a certain number of days, but what we would expect is, once we've been operating for a period of time and we've got a bit of data on the volume of projects that are coming through, we would then start to look at what are realistic timeframes and how can we surface them for people when they start the process, because we know it's really important to understand, because that can obviously have an influence on your planning and your workloads at different points during the time period. So yeah, I appreciate that's not doesn't exactly answer the question, but it's something we want to make those kind of decisions and provide that information based on the experience of doing it and the kind of the data that comes back from that, rather than kind of making a guess at it when we haven't actually operated it yet. Unless anyone, I think I did see Sohail on the call, unless he wants to say anything different on that.
Well, I think someone will have to unmute Sohail because he's technically a participant. That should be an out, yeah.
Hi, yes, agree with everything that Jenna and Rosie have said. Only thing to add is that a lot of this will depend on the nature of the inquiry. Part of the inquiry process, it's about working out the requirements, what's the appropriate pathway for the request, and what information's on the form. Sometimes the form is quite straightforward. In that case, we'd expect to be able to turn those things around fairly quickly, providing we're not inundated with many other requests. If it's not especially clear, or it's something that's a bit different or a bit unique, then often it results in a bit of back and forth with the researcher to try and tease out the details, and that can take a bit longer. So hoping it could be quite quick, but you have to wait and see.
I think it's also important to emphasize that this is our first release, and part of the value in doing this approach is we're going to get these insights faster than we've ever done before. We're going to actually be able to really demonstrate, this is our target time for responding to inquiries. So that is part of the beauty and potential of this system that hasn't quite existed in this format before. So both in that format in terms of task management, in terms of an interface where the researcher and the research coordinator can just interact much more in terms of real time, much more transparency. So just that kind of shared understanding from researchers that this is our prototype and we have to do this learning now. So it's great that everyone already has these questions of the new system, and it's up to Jen and her team to really start delivering those improvements. And someone else had a question. Yeah, the funding application talks about demonstrating added value. Could I clarify? Okay, so we can't fund research that already has a source of funding, but somewhere that might really add value, for instance, is PhD students. PhD students often have their 3 years funded, but they may not have been given data costs. So if this could be a really appealing way to demonstrate added value. You've had your PhD funded, but it didn't include data access costs. And in that case, you might only be applying to waive the data access costs so you can access the data you need to deliver or add to your PhD. That would be an example of added value. Other examples of added value might be you've worked with a project before and you had it funded before, but you realized or you came across like some really insightful evidence that wasn't in the scope of a previous project, but you could use this funding call to build on that kind of added value. So added value is just a generic statement to get people to think about, what makes your research project really, really different for bringing into the researcher access service. Because ultimately the researcher access service is going to be open for everyone and we want everyone to use it. We want to identify projects now at this early stage that can first of all really test the service, but also work with researchers who really want to work with us and develop it how it needs to be developed. So just to be clear, Research Data Scotland don't really hold data. We're a data services organisation, to answer that one. In terms of kind of student projects and stuff, because we're such an early organisation, we've really focused on how do we deliver our service and our minimum viable product, but definitely in the future we'll be looking to bring on kind of student projects or kind of paid internships, and we're working with all the university partners that I showed at the start. So yeah. So someone's asking about the added value. So does that mean that teams with some funding but not for this type of study are excluded? And I would say no. I would say that's where you may have funding for a community engagement project around mental health, but you want some population data about mental health in a certain community. So I would say no. I would say it's about funding data-driven research that has not already been funded. So if you have a fellowship from the SRC or from MRC that says you're going to deliver data linkage projects, you should not be applying for this funding, because that's double counting and double funding. But if you had a genuine project where you hadn't anticipated this kind of requirement, and this requirement would add value to your project, and equally your project that you're working on could add value for Research Data Scotland, that's what we mean there. And I hope that helps. Is one application from researchers at 2 different universities okay? Yes, I would say that is okay to have a joint application. And again, that also demonstrates some form of added value. It's collaborative working, especially if you can demonstrate that those 2 researchers at 2 different universities have the knowledge and the expertise for your project. That would be okay. You would just have to make sure universities are approved organizations, and then we would just have to work out the finances, but it could be releasing the relevant money to one university and the other, so that would be fine. Other data sets such as SMR 25 will be accessible. So we're entering this really nice kind of breather phase with the Researcher Access Service, where we demonstrate, and we've built this service, we're going to demonstrate that it functions, we need to demonstrate efficiencies, and then we're looking at which data sets have the right criteria to be brought in to the Researcher Access Service. So I can't give you a timeline of weeks or months, but I would hope within the next 2 years, definitely within the next 2 years, we have to expand the scope of the Researcher Access Service. And I think it's always good to recognise what sense of achievement that will be, to have as many possible public sector data for research and public good in one digital place with one streamlined application process. But this is to flag the Researcher Access Service is new and developing. It's not replacing what is already existing. You can still make your usual requests, come to the Research Data Scotland inquiry. If you do have requests for other data sets, putting them through the inquiry form on Research Data Scotland will help us to flag which data sets we don't yet have via the digital platform, and start to prioritise them. So I hope that helps as well. But I would say within the 2 years, the Researcher Access Service should have expanded beyond these 9 data sets. Oh, okay. Industry access via the university. So for this pathway, there is no industry access. I think we'd have to really scrutinise the application there, because it should be for researchers who are full-time within universities or within the NHS or within Scottish Government. So, yep, so we've got one about public in decision making when it comes to use of their data. So every single data set that we work with has to have a privacy statement which declares how the data can be used. With things like high linkage, individuals have opt-out for their data to be used for research purposes. We also have a new public panel called Scotland Talks Data, where we're bringing all these issues to a public forum. One of our values at Research Data Scotland is full transparency. So I would say the public is involved in multiple ways. Also in terms of how involved are members of the public in decision making when it comes to use of their data in this process. I think that's a really interesting question as well, thinking about how permissions have been implemented in the past, often on a project by project basis. Is that really a sustainable way to make sure public data is being used for public benefit? So there's lots of ways that public are involved already in helping us navigate this new way of thinking, and making sure. I think a lot of the learning comes from COVID as well. Like, you need data at real time, at pace, at scale to understand massive changes happening in society, and we're all at risk if we don't have that data ready when we need to use it, or actually to be more preventative in the longer term. So there's lots of public involvement. I wouldn't say it's at one point that there's public involvement. Yeah, there's the phrase "nothing about me without me." Yeah, and I'd just also flag Research Data Scotland ran a public engagement award last year and funded 9 projects that covered a range of issues, because it isn't just what project is your data used for, and it isn't just the information governance in place. It isn't just one thing about public involvement. It's about ensuring that the public support and understand the value that data has. And again, just to echo Research Data Scotland being set up to build that independence, to build that transparency into a system, and to have these conversations in a really open platform. Is there any interest pathway for the datasets? Nope, there is currently no industry access for this pathway. Again, to build public trust, to demonstrate that it's approved organisations, it's researchers working very clearly within the remit of public benefit. So I'll just quickly run through a couple of questions that came through via email. I think a lot of them have been covered, especially in terms of the last comments there about industry access. So just very clearly, it's approved organisations, which are UK-based public sector organisations, selected universities, NHS, local authorities, and Scottish Government. And the intention there is to build public trust and make sure there's organisational credibility in who works with this data. We've touched a lot on the linkage potential. So unfortunately, no intergenerational linkage is possible in this first release, but you can define a cohort in one data set and link to as many other data sets available. And the eligibility, I did bring up about PhD students. We would really encourage them, especially if they don't have data access costs covered in any PhD funding. We think that would really demonstrate added value and maximise the number of projects that we can fund. Touched a little bit on the management costs. So it's a total of £25,000 available. So if your organisation requested the full 15% management costs, you could only fund £21,250 of researcher time, with then £3,750 of management costs. That's just to give you an example, but you don't have to request all the 15% of management costs. Someone flagged the smallest geographical level. So there are geographical variables in the list that's provided alongside the funding call and alongside the application. But again, a lot of that comes down to disclosure. Even if you had a very specific study population and you looked at the higher level geographies, there's always going to be that risk of identifying individuals, and that wouldn't be allowed to leave the safe haven. Yeah, and unfortunately people asked about bringing data sets in and linking to those 9 data sets, but that's not within the remit of this current funding call. Yeah, I think when you go on to the application process, I think there's a drop-down list of universities, but I would double check. But we can also circulate which universities are approved. So all of our partner organisations definitely improved, which is University of Glasgow, University of Edinburgh, University of Dundee, and go back to the start. University of Aberdeen. But there are more organisations than this that are approved. So we'll definitely flag that. So I think from my perspective, the chat seems to have stopped and there's no hands raised. But I'd just like to thank everyone for joining today. If there are any follow-up questions, just use the info email address that's on the funding call. And just really encourage everyone to watch the Researcher Access Service, because it's the start of lots of exciting things that are happening over the next 2 years.